Hello friends and welcome to ICAI's online mentoring session on indirect taxes, which is part 2 of Paper-4 taxation. Let me introduce myself. I am Smita Mishra.
I am Shefali Jain.
We both are faculty for indirect taxes at Board of Studies of ICAI, and both of us will be your mentors for today's session. The topic for today's session is exemptions and abatements under service tax. Considering the significance of amendments from examination perspective, we are going to take up the amendments made under exemptions and service tax in today's chapter. And let me tell you that the bulk of amendments are made under exemptions and abatements generally. And as you know that for May 2016 examination, Finance Act 2015, the amendments made by the Finance Act 2015 and notifications and circulars issued till 31st October 2015, which is 6 months prior to the examination, the cutoff date, are relevant. So the amendments made from 1st May 2014 to 30th April 2015 are compiled and explained in Supplementary Study Paper 2015, and amendments made from 1st May 2015 to 31st October 2015 are given as statutory update in the revision test paper. What we'll be doing today is that we will bring together these two sets of amendments given in two different publications of BOS in today's session, and we will explain them one by one. So you will get the two different amendments given in two different publications together at one place in today's session. So in effect, if you see, we'll be covering the amendments made during the last 1.5 years. That is from 1st May 2014 to 31st October 2015 in today's session. The September 2015 edition of the study material, which is the relevant edition for you. In fact, the chapter 5 on exemptions and abatements given in that study material that incorporates the amendments made till 30th April 2015. But still, we'll be covering those amendments in today's session in detail so that you can understand them in a better manner. And how to go about this session? First, Shefali will take you through to the amendments made in the mega exemption notification, and then I will touch upon the amendments made in the abatement notification.
Make sure that you study from the relevant and applicable editions. In fact, ma'am has just told you that for study material and practice manual, September 2015 edition is applicable, and for supplementary study paper, the supplementary study paper 2015 is applicable. So make sure that you study from the correct editions, and let us move to PPTs now.
In fact, I would also request you that you can reserve your queries till we finish explaining the amendments, because why I say this, because most of the queries of yours could be resolved during the session itself. However, if you still have any unanswered questions, you can ask them at once we finish our explaining the amendments, and we will be happy to answer your queries.
Students may go through the disclaimer statement. Students are advised to refer to the study material, including supplementary study material if any, and other relevant legislation or latest provisions or amendments required for the forthcoming examination. Now, first of all, we will discuss the amendments made in the mega exemption notification. Now, mega exemption notification, it means that this notification contains the exempted services, list of exempted services. Before we start the amendments in the mega exemption notification, let us first of all understand that what are exempted services. And exempted services, as the term explains, that these are the services which are on which service tax is not payable. So question which might come to one's mind is that are these the only services on which service tax is not payable, or some other services are also there on which assessee does not have to pay service tax? So yes, the answer is yes, because there are negative list of services also on which service tax is not payable. So what is the difference between these two types of services? Why was there need to have two types of list of services on which service tax is ultimately not payable? So let us understand the difference between negative list as well as the exempted services. Negative list of services are the services which are outside the charging section. Charging section is section 66B. Now section 66B says that there shall be levied service tax on all services except the negative list of services. Okay, so that means the charging section itself has excluded the negative list from the purview of service tax, and therefore service tax is not chargeable on the negative list of services. However, in case of the exempted services, they are chargeable to service tax in the first place because they are not outside the purview of the charging section. Charging section says all services except negative list, but not except exempted services. So exempted services are chargeable to service tax, but they have been exempted later on by issuing a notification by the central government. So this is the first difference between these two types of services. That negative list of services are not chargeable to service tax in the first place, whereas exempted services are chargeable but exempted by a notification. Second difference is, in case the government wants to make any change in the negative list of services, any addition or any removal from the list, then how it can be made? It can be made by making change in the Finance Act 1994. Negative list of services are contained in section 66D of the Finance Act 1994. Now this Finance Act 1994 can be changed by making a change in the by the union budget. Every year you know that union budget is presented in the month of February, and in case of election year it is presented after the government is formed. So in this union budget, a finance bill is proposed, and in this finance bill proposals, there are proposals to amend the Finance Act 1994 also, which contains the suggestions regarding the negative list also. Any removal, any addition to the negative list is made through the finance bill, which is presented in the parliament every year. So this is very clear from this point that in case you want to make any change in the negative list, this can be made only once a year, because union budget is presented once in a year. However, in case of the exempted services, the changes can be made by issuing a notification. Now, this notification can be issued at any time of the year. Therefore, this is very clear that it is easier to make any change in the exempted services, while it is difficult to make any change in the negative list of services. Once you have included any service in the negative list of services, then in order to make any change, you have to wait for the finance bill, or you have to wait for the union budget to make any change in the negative list. Both the services are not, in case of both the services, service tax is not payable. But in one case, that is negative list, service tax is not chargeable at all. Whereas in exempted services, service tax is chargeable. They are chargeable to service tax, but service tax is not payable because they have been subsequently exempted. Now, mega exemption notification. Mega exemption notification is a notification wherein most of the exemptions have been consolidated at one place for ease of reference. If you want to see that whether any specific service is exempted or not, you may refer the mega exemption notification, and you will come to know that that particular taxable service, whether it is exempted, whether it has been exempted under the mega exemption notification or not. So we will be covering the amendments made in the mega exemption notification now. The ambulance services provided by all service providers exempted. Now, in fact, ambulance service can be the surface ambulance also or air ambulance also. Both these services are included here. What was the position prior to the amendment and what is the position after the amendment? Before the amendment, these services, ambulance services, were still exempt, but they were exempted to the extent they are provided by specified service providers. Okay. Now, when I say specified service providers, the service of ambulance service, you know what is an ambulance service? Ambulance service is the service of transportation of the patient from or to the clinical establishment. When you are taking a patient for treatment, then from home you are taking a patient to clinical establishment, then you have to resort to ambulance services, or from clinical establishment after being treated, it has to be transported to home or to his place. That is the ambulance services where you require them. Now, these services, when they were provided, earlier when they were provided by specified service providers, then only they were exempt. Now, who are these specified service providers? These specified service providers were clinical establishment, authorized medical practitioner, and paramedics. So, in case the transportation of the patient was being conducted by any three of these, then earlier it was exempted. But in case any person apart from these three service providers was providing the ambulance services, then that was taxable. That was, service tax was payable on them. They were not exempted. But with this amendment, the ambulance services provided by all service providers has been exempted. That means the ambulance services provided by third party, that has also now been exempted. Okay, earlier the ambulance service, if it was provided by clinical establishment or authorized medical practitioner or paramedics, then only it was exempted. If you are transporting the patient by these three of categories are transporting the patient, then it was exempt. But any other third party was transporting the patient, then it was not exempt. But ambulance services now provided by any service provider is exempt. Next amendment. Next amendment is right to admission to certain events or programs has been exempted. Now let us first of all understand the background of this amendment, why this exemption has been incorporated. This is an addition to the list of mega exemption notification, the exemptions which are given under the notification. The entry J of section 66D. Section 66D is negative list. Under negative list, entry J earlier provided that service by way of admission to entertainment events or access to amusement facility. It was earlier covered under the negative list. So that means it was not chargeable to service tax at all. However, Finance Act 2015 has omitted this entry J. So when by virtue of this omission, this admission to entertainment events or access to amusement facilities, it became leviable to service tax or chargeable to service tax. Okay. Now, however, these services were now become leviable to service tax, but after that, an entry was inserted in the mega exemption notification, which exempted these services. So not all the events or not all the facilities, but certain specified events or programs have been granted exemption by inserting an entry in the mega exemption notification. So those specified events or those specified programs continue to be exempted before this amendment and after this amendment. In fact, this amendment, since it was incorporated by Finance Act 2015, this omission of the entry in negative list was incorporated by Finance Act 2015. So it became effective on 1st June 2015. The previous amendment which we talked about, the ambulance service, that was effective from 1st April 2015. But this amendment is effective from 1st June because Finance Act 2015 made this effective from 1st June 2015, the omission of the entry. So simultaneously, the incorporation of the mega exemption entry also took place from 1st June 2015 itself. So on one hand, they have excluded or they have omitted an entry from the negative list of services, and simultaneously this exemption has been partially incorporated in the mega exemption notification. Now let us see what this entry is. Right to admission to exhibition of cinematographic film, circus, dance, and theatrical performance including drama or ballet. So if entry ticket to all these events is not subject to service tax. Similarly, right to admission to recognized sporting event. Now, what is a recognized sporting event? This we'll take later on in detail, that what do you mean by a recognized sporting event. Next is right to admission to an award function, a concert, a music concert, dance concert is there, that is entry ticket to that is not subject to service tax. Then pageant, musical performance, or any sporting event other than a recognized sporting event. Now here we are covering those sporting events which are not the recognized sporting event. Now question might come to one's mind that why there is a need to say that other sporting events not other than recognized sporting event. Why the differentiation between the same entry? Because we could have said that any sporting event is exempt, but actually there is a rider to this exemption, that in these 5 cases, the right to admission to these 5 events will be available, will be exempted only when the consideration for admission is not more than 500 per person. So in case entry ticket for these events is more than 500 per person, then entire consideration will be taxable. Okay, so that is why this entry becomes all the more important, that in case it is a recognized sporting event, then there is no such rider that the consideration for admission should be less than or equal to 500. It can be, the amount of consideration can be any. But in case it's a unrecognized sporting event, then the consideration should be less than equal to 500, then only exemption is available. And in case of all these events, award function, concert, pageant, musical performance, the consideration should be less than equal to 500 per person, then only the exemption will be available. While such rider was not there under the, in case of the earlier entries. Now next is, we said that we'll discuss what is a recognized sporting event. So let us see, recognized sporting event is any sporting event organized by recognized sports body, National Sports Federation. In fact, in these two cases, when the sporting event is organized by any recognized sports body or National Sports Federation, then the participating team or the individuals, they should represent any district or state or zone or any country. So any sporting event organized by recognized sports body where the participating team or individuals represent any district, state, zone or country, they shall be considered as recognized sporting event. Or same way is for National Sporting Federation also, that any sporting event organized by National Sports Federation where the participating team or individual represent any district, state, zone or country shall be eligible as recognized sporting event. Besides, any sporting event organized by Association of Indian Universities, Inter-University Sports Board, School Games Federation of India. In fact, these are all the universities or boards which can organize a sporting event and they will be eligible as recognized sporting event. And recognized sporting event entry ticket or admission, right to admission is exempted. So these are various bodies which can organize a sporting event and that will be eligible for exemption, that will be eligible as recognized sporting event. So you can go through the list. Now next entry. Next is actually a withdrawal of the exemption. Earlier entry J of section 66. Now this provided entry J of the section 66. Section 66 is the negative list of services. So entry J provides that services by way of carrying out any process amounting to manufacture or production of goods is not leviable to service tax because it is covered under entry. In fact, it's not entry J, it's entry F. So it is covered under negative list of services. Okay. So under entry F of the negative list of services, any service by way of carrying out any process amounting to manufacture or production of goods is not leviable to service tax. Now, Finance Act 2015 has amended this particular entry. Okay, and it has excluded the process for production or manufacture of alcoholic liquor for human consumption. So any potable liquor will be excluded from this particular entry. Process of production of alcoholic liquor for human consumption has been excluded from this particular entry by Finance Act 2015. And therefore, in fact, this has also been done from 1st June 2015. This amendment of the entry F is effective from 1st June, and therefore the corresponding change in the mega exemption notification because of this amendment will also be effective from the same date, that is 1st June 2015. But that will come to later on. First of all, let us discuss what was the change in the basic negative list entry. Okay, so service tax become payable on the job work for production of potable liquor because of this omission. Now, simultaneously, this entry had also been removed from the mega exemption notification. And therefore, now the carrying out of intermediate production of alcoholic liquor for human consumption on job work basis will become liable to service tax. Okay. Earlier, this was exempted by the mega exemption notification, but due to the change or due to amendment in the negative list of services. Same way, this amendment has been carried out in the mega exemption notification also, and the exemption has been withdrawn. So now carrying out any intermediate production process of potable liquor or alcoholic liquor for human consumption on job work basis will be liable to service tax. So this is a withdrawal of exemption, and it is effective from 1st June 2015. Now, life insurance schemes exemption. There were certain life insurance schemes which were exempted under which are exempted in fact under mega exemption notification. Now, the amendment is that certain more life insurance schemes have been added to this. These are Pradhan Mantri Jeevan Jyoti Bima Yojana. The effective date for this exemption is 30th April 2015. Okay, so this is an addition to the list. Next is Varisht Pension Bima Yojana, which is effective from 1st April 2015. Next is the Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana. Now this is effective from 30th April 2015. Okay, so these are the 3 life insurance schemes which have been exempted from service tax. There were certain other life insurance schemes also which are mentioned in the mega exemption notification. Now these are 3 new additions in these 1.5 year period, the amendments which we are covering. Next is collection of contribution under Atal Pension Yojana. So any contribution made to Atal Pension Yojana, which is a pension scheme for the old age people, that will be exempt from service tax. And the effective date for this exemption is also 30th April 2015. Service tax is not payable on the collection of the contribution under Atal Pension Yojana. Next is also a general insurance scheme, that is Pradhan Mantri Suraksha Bima Yojana. Now that is also exempted from service tax, and the effective date is 30th April 2015. Now next, exemption. So we have seen quite a number of additions are there to the mega exemption notification list. Another addition is treatment of effluent by common effluent treatment plant. Okay, now what is an effluent? Common effluent treatment plant operator. In fact, this has been exempted. Now what is an effluent? Effluent is the liquid waste which is secreted from the industries. And in fact, industries are under obligation to purify this, because whenever this liquid waste, where does it go? It goes into rivers, sea, ocean, water. So basically, the industries are under an obligation to purify this liquid waste because they cannot keep on polluting water with their effluent waste. So for that, an effluent treatment plant need to be established. And since it is not possible for the small industries or small factories to have their own effluent treatment plants, so generally, what government has done is they have established common effluent treatment plants at many places. And the operator of these common effluent treatment plants, they are exempted from service tax, because the government actually wants to encourage such common effluent treatment plants in order to promote the environment, to environment conservation or cleaner environment. These common effluent treatment plant operators have been provided exemption. Okay. So, treatment of effluent by common effluent treatment plant operator has been exempted from service tax, and this is a new addition to the list. This exemption is effective from 1st April 2015. Next entry is also an addition to the list. A new exemption has been incorporated. Preconditioning, pre-cooling. Generally, what is preconditioning or pre-cooling of fruits and vegetables? The vegetables are kept under, actually for carrying for storage purposes or for transportation purposes, they are kept under cold environment or cold storages they are kept, and for transportation it's easier to transport them because their shelf life increases during preconditioning and pre-cooling. Ripening is the artificial ripening, or you can say ripening under controlled temperatures. The fruits or vegetables, they are ripened under controlled temperatures to get the desired results, to get the desired quality of fruits and vegetables. They are generally artificially ripened under controlled conditions, controlled temperatures. So that is ripening. Waxing is During washing of the vegetables and fruits, generally they lose their natural sheen or natural shine. So in order to provide them an artificial layer or artificial shine, a layer of wax is generally layered on them, and that is the process of waxing. Then you know that packing and labeling is done. Packing, you have to pack different quantities of fruits and vegetables for selling them, and labeling is done to ensure the quality of a particular fruit and vegetable. These all processes you see, they are to make the product, to make the fruits and vegetables more saleable, and these processes are undertaken on fruits and vegetables once they are plucked or once the crops are harvested. These are undertaken on them after that. So these processes make the fruits and vegetables more saleable. That is the preconditioning, pre-cooling, ripening, waxing, retail packing, and labeling. Now the underlying condition for claiming this exemption is that these processes, any of these processes, are eligible for exemption, but they should not lead to any change in the essential characteristics of said fruits or vegetables. Okay, and anyhow these processes will not change the essential characteristics of the fruits and vegetables. So all these processes will be eligible for exemption from service tax. Admission to specified places exempted. Now which are these specified places to which the admission has been exempted from service tax? First is museum, then zoo, national park, wildlife sanctuary, and tiger reserve. In fact, national park and zoo is, you all know what a zoo is actually, normally what we mean by zoo. But we'll see the definition of it, which is provided under the respective act. That we'll go through in detail. National park, wildlife sanctuary are the places where animals are kept under government-owned lands or under embarked areas. Especially demarcated areas, the animals are kept in their natural habitat and they are being conserved there. And tiger reserve is for conservation of the tigers. So this exemption has been provided for admission to these particular places: museum, zoo, national park, wildlife sanctuary, and tiger reserve. So entry ticket to all these 5 places will be exempt from service tax. Okay, now let us go through these definitions. Museum is what we understand in the common parlance, and apart from that, zoo, national park, wildlife sanctuary, and tiger reserve have been defined under Wildlife Protection Act 1972. So whatever is the definition of zoo, national park, wildlife sanctuary, and tiger reserve provided in this particular act, that is the definition we have taken for the purpose of the service tax also. So what we mean by zoo or tiger reserve or national park or wildlife sanctuary under this act is what we have taken for the service tax purpose also. Let us see the definition of zoo. Zoo means an establishment, whether stationary or mobile, where captive animals are kept for exhibition to public. Okay, so this is what zoo is. Now, point which need to be noted here is the mobile. The zoo can be stationary or mobile. So this implies that mobile zoo is also exempt. This entry to mobile zoo is also exempt from service tax. Now, what zoo does not include? In the previous slide, we covered that what zoo actually means, and we saw that mobile zoo is also covered under the definition of zoo, which is provided under Wildlife Protection Act. Now, zoo does not include a circus. In fact, if you remember, we have just now covered a mega exemption entry, which says that admission to a circus is covered under the a specific entry. Let's go back to that entry so that you may remind that. This is the entry. Right to admission to certain events or programs exempted. So there the circus is specifically excluded from the definition of zoo, but by virtue of this entry, entry ticket to circus is exempt from service tax. Okay, so sometimes it happens that one item is specifically excluded by virtue of definition of zoo. Entry ticket to circus was not exempted, but by virtue of this particular entry, the entry to zoo or right to admission to not zoo, circus is exempt from service tax. So let us come to the entry which we were discussing. Then what zoo does not include is an establishment of a licensed dealer in captive animals. So if any person is having the animals in his shop, or he's selling the animals in his shop, he has a license for that particular purpose, then that will not be considered as zoo and he will not be eligible for exemption. Now next entry. Next entry is also an addition to the list, that is exhibition of movie by exhibitor exempted. Now exhibitor, what service it provides? Generally exhibitor means a theater owner. So it provides the service of screening of the movie. There can be two types of arrangements where he provides this service. One is exhibitor providing this service to distributor. Okay, which service? Service of exhibition of movie or service of screening of the movie. Distributor is the person to whom the producer of the movie, the one who has produced the movie, he has given the rights to distribute that movie. Now distributor will decide where the movie has to be screened. So this distributor, he appoints various, or he ties up with various exhibitors for screening of the movie, and therefore the exhibitor provides the service of exhibition of movie to the distributor, and this particular service has now been exempted from service tax. Second arrangement could be that there could be an association of persons of various distributors, area distributors, sub-distributors, as well as the exhibitor. All these people, they enter into an agreement and they form an association of persons. And exhibitor, although he is a member of this association of persons, now he provides this service of exhibiting the movie or screening the movie to this particular AOP. Okay, and this service is also exempt. The exhibitor or the theater owner, he is providing the service of screening of movie either to the distributor when one-on-one relationship is there, or in case there is an association of persons wherein the exhibitor, distributor, sub-distributor and area distributors are there, then when exhibitor is providing the service of screening of movie to this AOP, then that will also be exempt from service tax. Now this previous exemption was applicable from 1st April 2015. In fact, before that also we had covered the admission to specified places. That was also applicable from 1st April 2015. Kailash Mansarovar pilgrimage exempted. Now, the Kailash Mansarovar pilgrimage, it is organized by the Kumaon Mandal Vikas Nigam Limited. It's a government of Uttarakhand undertaking, and it provides various facilities to the pilgrims like organizing buses, accommodation, camps, etc. So the service which is provided by Kumaon Mandal Vikas Nigam Limited, it has been exempted from service tax. Same way, Hajj pilgrimage has also been exempted. Now, Hajj pilgrimage is organized by Hajj Committee of India, as well as there are certain state Hajj committees also. So these committees and state Hajj committees, they provide the services or facilities to the Hajj pilgrims, like same type of services, buses, accommodation, etc. Now these services provided, now they shall be exempt from service tax. Now these two services which we have just discussed, Hajj pilgrimage and Kailash Mansarovar pilgrimage, these two services shall be exempted with effect from 28th of August 2014. Now we come to the next service, next exemption in fact. Monetary limit prescribed for folk or classical art performance. Now this entry is already existing in the mega exemption notification, but what has been done by this amendment is that its scope has been restricted and a monetary limit has been prescribed for the same. Earlier, there was no monetary limit and this particular service was exempted without any limit. Okay. So prior to amendment, what was the situation? First of all, go through with that and then we'll discuss what is the change in the situation. Prior to amendment, services by a performing artist in folk or classical art form of music or dance or theatre is exempted. Okay. Now, when I say folk or classical art form, that means in case a person is performing some modern music performance is being given by an artist, or some modern dance is being performed, some Western dance is being performed. So that means that will not be included here. Similarly, any other art forms are also being prescribed. Which art forms are covered under this exemption list are music, dance, and theatre. Okay. So in case some painting is there, some folk painting is there, that will also not be included here. So the services provided by the performing artist should be in folk or classical form, and the art form should be music, dance, or theatre in order to claim this exemption. Prior to the amendment, there was no monetary limit for this particular exemption. Any performance by any artist in these art forms which have been specified that was eligible for exemption from service tax. Only one exception was there, and that was the exception of the brand ambassador. Now, what is a brand ambassador? Brand ambassador is a person who performs these art forms for promoting any particular product or any particular service. Now, he may give a classical dance performance also, or a classical music performance also, for the promotion of the products which he is endorsing, but that will not be eligible for exemption. So the condition of this exemption is being satisfied in this case, but since the person is a brand ambassador, he is doing this for promoting any particular brand of goods or brand of services, he will not be eligible for exemption. So this performance should not be for promoting any product or any service. Then in that case, that will not be eligible for exemption. After the amendment, the exemption is same, the entry is same. Only thing which has been changed is the monetary limit has been put, and this monetary limit is 1 lakh rupees. Now, how this monetary limit has to be applied? Now, in case for example, the consideration for performing a dance or classical music or classical dance is 95,000. Okay, so artist is getting the total consideration of 95,000 for a performance. So he will be eligible for exemption, and in that case, he does not have to pay a rupee of service tax. That means his entire consideration will be exempt. But in case his consideration is 1,01,000 rupees, then in that case, his entire consideration will be taxable, or service tax will be payable on his entire consideration. It means that what I want to highlight here is that it will not be so that up to 1 lakh he does not have to pay any service tax, and after that on 1,000 rupees service tax will be payable. No, his entire consideration will be taxable. So he will be exempted only when his consideration is up to rupees 1 lakh. In case his consideration exceeds rupees 1 lakh, then his entire consideration will become taxable, or he has to pay service tax on his entire consideration. So this is how the monetary limit has been put on this particular exemption. Next is also a restriction to the existing entry. Exemption to transportation of foodstuff by rail or vessel or road has been restricted. First of all, we'll see what was the situation prior to amendment. Prior to amendment, the transportation of these items by rail, road or vessel was exempt. Foodstuff, basically. Now, foodstuff included flour, tea, coffee, jaggery, sugar, milk products, salt, and edible oil, excluding alcoholic beverages. This was the situation prior to the amendment. After the amendment, this entry has been amended, and now only milk. Now, when I say milk products are not included here. Salt, then food grains, including flours, pulses, and rice are exempt. So this is the change in the exemption, and in fact, this exemption has been narrowed down, or this exemption has been curtailed. Again, a withdrawal of exemption. Exemption to services by mutual fund agent or distributor to a mutual fund or asset management company withdrawn. Now, mutual fund agent and distributor, they provide services to mutual fund or asset management company. Mutual fund company or asset management company, what they do is they pool the funds of the people and they invest these funds in specific securities or shares, and the return is being distributed to the people who have to the investors. So investors get their funds in diversified areas, diversified securities, and the technical knowledge of these mutual fund companies or the technical skill of these mutual fund agent company people, they help the people to get better returns. So now how these mutual fund company or asset management company, they approach investors. They approach investors through mutual fund agent or distributors. So mutual fund agent or distributors, they bring business to mutual fund company or asset management company. Earlier, the service which was provided by mutual fund agent or distributor to mutual fund company or asset management company, that is the service of bringing business to these people, it was earlier exempt. Now this exemption has been withdrawn. In fact, now this exemption has been after withdrawal of this exemption, it has now been put under reverse charge, full reverse charge. This service has now been brought under full reverse charge, and service tax is payable by the service receiver in this case. Service receiver is mutual fund or asset management company. So entire service tax on the service provided by mutual fund agent or distributor will be paid by mutual fund company or asset management company under full reverse charge. Next is also withdrawal of exemption, that is exemption to services by selling or marketing agent of lottery tickets to a distributor or selling agent. Now generally what happens, the state governments, they print the lottery tickets and they give these lottery tickets to the lottery distributors or selling agents. Okay, and in turn, it may also be possible that these lottery distributors or selling agents may appoint certain selling or marketing agents of lottery tickets for selling these lottery tickets to the general public. So these selling or marketing agents of lottery tickets, they are providing services to lottery distributor or selling agent. Earlier, these services were exempted from service tax. Now, this exemption has now been withdrawn, and similarly, in this case also, the service tax is payable under reverse charge, under full reverse charge. That means entire service tax payable shall be deposited by the service receiver, that is lottery distributor or selling agent, on the services provided to it by selling or marketing agents of lottery tickets. Okay, so service tax is payable under full reverse charge in this particular service which has been made taxable. No service tax on yoga. Now on yoga, advancement of yoga, now service tax will not be payable. How this amendment has been done? The definition of charitable activities has been amended. Okay. Earlier the definition, now first of all let us see what this exemption was. Under mega exemption notification, there is an entry which says that services provided by an entry registered under section 12AA of the Income Tax Act. Any charitable entity registered under section 12AA of the Income Tax Act, if it provides the charitable activities, then that is exempted under mega exemption notification. Okay. Now the definition of charitable activities, earlier it used to provide, apart from other entries, it has one entry which says that activities relating to advancement of religion or spirituality is a charitable activity. So that activity is provided by a charitable entity registered under this section. That was exempted. Now in this entry, yoga has also been incorporated. Therefore, the services relating to advancement of yoga, if these are provided by this particular charitable entity, then that will be exempt from service tax. So this is an addition to the mega exemption list. Next is service of bank mitras. Now what is a bank mitra actually? Bank mitra is, before bank mitra, you know that Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana, on which we have just covered the exemption also. Under Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana, the aim is that everybody or every individual should have a bank account. Okay. Now there are many rural areas where it is not feasible to establish a brick and mortar bank branch. Okay, it is not possible to establish a bank branch in the rural area. So how to access those people? How we can have those people get their accounts open? For that particular purpose, the banks have appointed bank mitras. Bank mitras, or you can say bank mitras, are also bank facilitators or bank correspondents. These business facilitators or business correspondents, they are generally known as bank mitra, or in common parlance we call them bank mitras, but they are actually business facilitators or business correspondents for the banks. So what banks do is, and generally these are the retired bank employees, retired teachers, retired government employees, ex-servicemen who are specifically appointed for this particular purpose, for providing these services, banking services to the rural areas people. And which banking service? Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana. That is, we help the people in opening their accounts under Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana. Then they help them in filling and submitting the forms, because these people generally they don't know these simple formalities also, and collecting these amounts for deposit amounts, and then cash withdrawals also. Aadhaar seeding, that means linking their bank account with the Aadhaar. So all these services are provided by business facilitators or business correspondents known as bank mitra in the rural areas. Now, this particular service of these bank mitras has been exempted from service tax, because basic aim is to promote them. So they have been exempted. Now, in case these business facilitators, they appoint any intermediary for this service which they are providing, they appoint any intermediary, then that intermediary shall also be, the service provided by that intermediary to business facilitator or business correspondent will also be exempt. So two entries are there in this particular exemption: the services provided by bank mitra, as well as the service provided by intermediary to bank mitra, with respect to such service, with respect to the basic saving bank deposit accounts covered under Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana shall be eligible for exemption from service tax. Services provided under PSDF scheme. PSDF is Power System Development Fund. Okay. Now, what this fund is all about and why it has been established. Now, actually, the government is actually aiming to revive its stranded gas-based power plants. The power plants which are engaged in generating power from gas, natural gas basically, and plants who are receiving the domestic natural gas also. So for that particular purpose, this fund has been formed or created. What is actually done is the Gas Authority of India Limited, it imports the liquefied natural gas. Now, natural gas is imported in liquid form because it is easier form of transportation. It is easy to transport natural gas in liquid form. But after importing it in liquid form, it has to be converted into gas again. For using it, it has to be in gaseous form. So that is the regasification. So regasification of LNG is actually converting natural gas again into gaseous form. So that particular service which is being provided by Gas Authority of India Limited, that is exempt from service tax. Why this has been done? Because the government wants to actually promote this particular practice in order to encourage, or you can say in order to revive its stranded gas-based power plants, for which it has been imported, for which this LNG has actually been imported. In fact, after regasification, this LNG, that is regasified liquefied natural gas, RLNG, it has to be transported to these gas-based power plants. So this particular service has also been exempted. Why this has been done? So as to provide a benefit to these gas-based power plants, the power plants which are engaged in generating power based on natural gas. So basically the aim of the Ministry of Power is to make this RLNG to these power plants at subsidized prices. And in fact, the subsidy comes from this fund itself. Besides this subsidy, they have given them the service tax exemption also on regasification plus on transportation of the incremental RLNG also. Okay. Other benefits are also being provided to these gas-based power plant. Like they are given the subsidy in terms of reduced transportation costs, marketing charges. So the basic objective of this whole exemption is to give benefit to the specified power generating companies. These power generating companies have been specified in the annexure, and this exemption is applicable or valid till 31st March 2017, and this is applicable from 19th May 2015. So from 19th May till 31st March 2017, this exemption is valid. Now the next exemption. Next is exemption withdrawn. The services by way of making telephone calls from departmentally run public telephones, guaranteed public telephone operating only for local calls, have been exempted. Services by way of making telephone calls from free telephone at airport or hospital where no bills have been issued have also been. This exemption which was earlier there, it has now been withdrawn.
Can we take online queries? And then we'll come to abatement portion. Mansha is asking, labeling of fruits or vegetables are termed as deemed manufacture. Hence, this activity should be liable to excise duty. You've read your excise portion very well, Mansha. Of course, labeling and relabeling of goods is deemed manufacture, but not all sort of labeling and relabeling. Labeling and relabeling of goods which are mentioned in 3rd schedule to the Central Excise Act, that those particular type of labeling and relabeling is deemed manufacture, not relabeling or labeling or relabeling of all goods. So what you need to see is that whether fruits and vegetables, they are covered in that 3rd schedule to the Central Excise Act. And as far as I remember, they are not covered. In fact, in that 3rd schedule, only the goods which are applicable for which the provisions relating to Legal Metrology Act, that means the MRP provisions, the goods for which the MRP provisions are applicable, those are only the goods for which this provision relating to deemed manufacture as given in clause 3 of section 2F is applicable. So for this particular thing, excise duty is not liable. Mansha has one more question. Is it necessary to learn effective date of exemptions and abatements? See, we are telling you the dates so that you are aware as to when the situation has changed. But as regards as examinations are concerned, you need not remember the dates of the amendment as to when that amendment became effective. In fact, what you are supposed to know is that what is the position relevant as on 31st October 2015, which is the cutoff date for your examination. You need not remember those dates for the examination point of view. However, it is expected that you should be aware as to when this amendment became effective. Now we can shift to the PPTs. The second part is on abatements with respect to various taxable services. Now you've covered all the amendments with respect to exemptions. So exemptions, as you know, is when the service tax has been entirely exempt. When I say exemption and abatement, what is the difference? As such, both of them are exemptions. There is no difference as such. Exemption is also a sort of exemption means where the service tax has been remitted. Abatement also is an exemption. What is the difference is that in case of exemptions, the service provider is not liable to pay any service tax. 100% service tax liability is remitted. Service tax is not liable to be paid at all. However, in case of abatement, it is a case of partial exemption. Whole liability is not remitted. A part of the service tax value is basically abated, and then the service provider is required to pay only the service tax only on the balance value. As if you see the dictionary meaning of the abatement, that means that says it is reducing, lessening. So basically the liability gets reduced to the extent of the abatement provided in the notification. The exemptions, as she told you, Shefali, they are covered in mega exemption notification. Abatements, there is a separate notification, abatement notification. And in fact, that notification number 26/2012, STA dated 20th June 2012, that is the abatement notification. But if you go to the notification and see there, in fact, there the rates, percentages of abatements are not given. The notification specifies the percentages of the taxable value of the service. So you should not get confused. Notification specifies percentages of taxable value. That is, if the table is given in a notification, it says 40%. So 40% of the value is taxable. So what becomes the abatement? Abatement becomes 60%. That's how. It is a way of saying it. With either way you want to say it, or you want to say the taxable value, or you want to say the abatement. Then there are certain conditions which need to be fulfilled by the service provider for availing these abatements. The major condition, if you go through the notification, if you see, in fact, what is given in this chapter also, the foremost and the significant condition which needs to be fulfilled is the non-availment of Senvat credit. That is one of the major condition which a service provider is required to fulfill if he wants to avail the benefit of abatement. See, and why it has been done? Because the basic purpose is not to allow dual benefit. Senvat is also a kind of benefit. So once the government is allowing you a partial exemption, at the same time, it won't give you the benefit of Senvat. So you have to forego one benefit in order to avail the benefit of abatement. So then you will say, then why was there is no such condition when we were discussing about exemption? If you remember your Senvat credit provisions, you will remember that when a assessee is rendering an exempted services, he cannot take Senvat credit at all. So there, the condition itself is given in the Senvat credit. So there is no requirement for specifically debarring availment of Senvat. But as regards abatement, since it's a case of partial exemption, it has to be clarified that he cannot avail Senvat if he wants to avail partial exemption by way of abatement. Whole Senvat credit he cannot avail. And then, as you know, Senvat credit can be availed on three things basically: inputs, input services, and capital goods. So the conditions basically revolve around not allowing Senvat credit either on inputs or on input services or on capital goods. In some of the cases, in some of the services, in fact, the Senvat credit is not allowed on all the three. So it is basically the combination of these three things on which the Senvat credit should not be taken in order to avail the benefit of abatement. Now coming to the amendments which have been made in the notification number 26/2012, that is the notification prescribing the various rates of abatement or the various rates of taxable value for the different services. Uniform abatement of 70% has been prescribed for goods and passenger transport by rail and goods transport by road and vessel, of course subject to uniform conditions. So what you see is, basically, in fact, this is the amendment, but in order to understand the amendment in a better manner, let us first understand what was the existing situation. Prior to amendment, the transport of goods by rail, the percentage of abatement prescribed was 70%. And when goods were transported by road by a goods transport agency, the percentage of abatement was higher. That means service tax was leviable on a lesser value, 75% when you compare it with rail. And when goods were transported by vessels, the abatement percentage was 60%. The lowest abatement percentage was in respect of in respect of transportation of goods by vessels. Now what has been done after the amendment? All these three percentages have been merged and only one common 70% abatement has been fixed for all the three transportation of goods. If you see, transportation of goods by rail, transportation of goods by vessel, transportation of goods by road, by GTA, in all the three cases, the abatement prescribed now becomes 70%. It is easier for you to remember. Plus one more transportation, but that is not of goods transport, that is of passenger transportation. Passenger transportation by rail, for that also the abatement prescribed now is 70%, and the conditions have also been made uniform. What are the conditions? Prior to the amendment, the abatement prescribed for rail transport for goods and passengers had no condition at all. It was a bonanza. There was no condition to be fulfilled for availing the abatement. However, in case of goods transport by road by GTA or by vessel, the assessee was not allowed to take Senvat credit on inputs, capital goods, and input services. In all the three components, Senvat credit could not be taken. Now, this particular condition, if you see what is the change basically, in case of rail transport for goods and passenger, Senvat credit on inputs, capital goods, and input services used for providing the taxable service should not be taken. So basically, the conditions for goods transport by road and goods transport by vessel remain the same. They were not allowed to take the credit prior to the amendment also. After the amendment also, they will not be allowed to take credit on all the three components. However, in case of rail transport, the rail people have to fulfill this condition in order to avail the abatement of 70%. And if you see the prior changes in rate also, as regards rail transport is considered, both for goods and passengers, the rate remains the same, 70 and 70. What has changed is for goods transport by road, there in fact, if you see, the abatement has decreased. That means the percentage taxable value has increased. So the service tax leviable would be more in case of goods transport by rate. That will become costlier. And in respect of goods transport by vessels also, in fact, if you see, the abatement has increased. So this is a beneficial thing for goods transport by vessel. Abatement percentage has increased by 10%. So now the taxable value in case of goods transport by vessel will become 30%. Previously, it was 40%. Now coming to the next amendment. Here the abatement percentage for passenger transportation by air in non-economic class has been reduced. Let me tell you the effective date also for this amendment. This amendment has become effective from 1st of April 2015. Earlier, prior to the amendment, there was no differentiation in the case of passenger transportation by air between the classes. Like whatever the abatement percentage was applicable for the passenger transportation by air, it was same for both economic class or non-economic class. There was no differentiation as such. Only one abatement percentage was prescribed for passenger transportation by air. That was the situation prior to the amendment. And what was the percentage which was prescribed? That was 60%, irrespective of whether the passenger is traveling in economic class or in a higher class like as business class. Now what has happened after the amendment? After the amendment, this time the government, in fact, they segregated the passengers. Now they have two separate abatement percentages for passengers traveling in economic class and for passengers traveling in a class other than economic class, that is higher class like business class. And if you see, the percentage of abatement is lower for person traveling in business class. So it is a classic case of, if you see, progressive taxation, where the people who have higher income should be paying more taxes. So for them, the service tax liability would be higher as compared to the people who would be traveling in economic class. Let us take a small example to understand it. Arman traveled by air in business class on 15th August 2015. If you see the date, that means I'm going to talk about a situation when the amendment has occurred, because I think I didn't tell you the effective date for the last amendment also. This amendment also became effective from 1st of April 2015. So in our example, which we are going to consider the date after the amendment has happened. So the Arman traveled by air in business class on 15th August 2015 by Origin Airlines. He booked the ticket on the same day. The airfare charges, value on which service tax was payable, was rupees 1 lakh. You are required to determine the amount of service tax payable on the services received by Arman. And what else has been given to you? The information has been given that the airlines has opted for abatement. One should also note this thing, that this is an option. Abatement is always an option because you are required to fulfill that condition. So it is up to you whether you want to take an abatement or you want to pay the tax and avail the whole entire credit. This abatement thing is an option for the service provider. So in this case, the Origin Airlines has opted for the abatement, and it has not availed credit on inputs capital goods which are used for providing such service. Rate of service tax is 14%. And the Origin Airlines is not eligible for small service providers exemption under notification number 33 dated 20th June 2012. In fact, I would like to make one point here, highlight one point. Since in this session we are covering the amendments which are relevant for May 2016 examination, we are considering the rate of service tax as 14%. However, if any of you who's going to appear in November 2016 examination is listening to this session, you may note that for you, SBC, Swachh Bharat cess is also applicable, and then the rate of service tax will become 14.5%. Why it is not applicable for May 2016 examination? The reason being that the Swachh Bharat cess has been made effective from 15th of November 2015. So it falls beyond the cutoff date for May 2016 examination. So for that purpose, we have not made it applicable for May 2016 examination. But for November 2016 examination, you should be applying the rate as 14.5%. So how will you compute the service tax liability in this case? What you have to see in this case is, the question clearly says that rupees 1 lakh is the value on which service tax is to be payable. You should be paying attention to these details. Why? Because if you go to the service tax valuation rules, you will see there's a specific exclusion for the taxes levied on the airfare charges. In that case, those taxes will not form part of the value of the service. So whenever you are solving any question, you should see whether on what value the service tax has to be applied. Here, the question is quite clear that this is the value on which service tax is payable. It does not involve any taxes and all. So this rupees 1 lakh is the value on which service tax has to be payable. And now we know that the abatement percentage, since this person is traveling in business class, that means for him the abatement has been reduced from 60% to 40%. Therefore, service tax will be payable on 60% of the value of airfare charges. So service tax will be 60% of 1 lakh and then multiplied by 14%, which comes to 8,400. Then there was a clarification also issued by the CBEC in respect to goods transport by goods transport agency. When you are transporting, when a goods transport agency transports the goods by road, there were certain issues. What happens when a goods transport agency transports goods? It does not restrict itself only to the transportation of goods by road. It undertakes various other ancillary activities also, like loading of the goods on the mode of transport, unloading of the goods, packing, temporary storage, transshipment of the goods. So what happened? There were issues, there were doubts in the mind of the industry or in the trade that whether the abatement which is applicable for goods transport agency, will that abatement be also applicable in respect of such ancillary services provided by the GTA? The department has come out with a circular clarifying that all such ancillary services, which I just now told you, loading, unloading of the cargo, packing, unpacking, transshipment, temporary storage. In fact, if you see, the GTA might itself do all such services, or it might also subcontract these services to the third party. But in both the cases, it will bill you the invoice issued by the GTA if they are billing you for all such services. For you, basically, the GTA is providing such service. It does not matter to the SSE whether GTA is taking such services from a subcontractor or not. If the invoice issued by the GTA is inclusive of all the inclusive of the value of such services, the department has clarified that becomes these ancillary services, they become part of the main service. When you will go to the final level, you will learn about the concept of bundled service in greater detail, and you will be able to appreciate this concept in a better manner. Right now, for you, you should understand that these ancillary services are not being done by GTA as an independent activity. They are necessary for the GTA. GTA is undertaking such activities so as to successfully render the service of its transportation of goods. GTA is not doing these services as an independent activity. So they become part of the GTA service, and hence the abatement which is applicable for GTA services will also be applicable for such ancillary services undertaken by GTA. But it is necessary that GTA should be doing such services in the course of transportation of goods, and the charges for such services are included in the invoice issued by the GTA. If GTA is giving the customer an invoice issued by a third party, that these services I have taken from a third party and this is the invoice issued by the third party, you pay to the third party. In that case, that third party is doing those services independently. Then that abatement will not be applicable for the GTA. This particular 70% abatement will not be applicable for the ancillary services if there is a separate invoice issued by a third party for those activities. Only when the GTA, when it is clear from the contract of the service that these activities are being undertaken by the GTA on their own, they are undertaking these activities. In that case, the abatement which is applicable for the GTA services will apply for such ancillary activities also. Then the next amendment is in relation to chit business. Prior to the amendment, there was an abatement of 30%, which was available in case of a chit business. That means service tax was payable on the 70% of the value of the services. However, what has been done from 1st of April 2015, the such abatement percentage has been done away with. So from 1st of April 2015, service tax would be payable on the 100% value of the chit business. Here again, I would like to mention one point, that if November 2016 students are also listening to this session, please note that there are further amendments which have been made in few of the amendments which we have covered today, like in this amendment also. So I would advise you that you should go through the supplementary study paper 2016. We are in the process of preparing that supplementary study paper 2016, and it will be available to you after the finance bill gets enacted. So I will advise you to go through that carefully, because for you there are further changes in this notification which I am discussing. But however, for May 2016 examination, whatever we are discussing is relevant and applicable. Just to clarify, in any case, if November 2016 students are also listening to this lecture. Now that was with the abatements. Now we come to two more separate exemptions. In fact, as I told you, that Shefali covered the exemptions which were made in the mega exemption notification. However, there are two separate exemptions which are not covered in mega exemption notification. They are covered by separate notification. So we will be taking up those amendments now. See, in this case, when an exporter, he exports the goods, then he transports the goods which are meant for export from his place of removal, either to port or to airport or to a CFS or ICDS. I'll tell you what these terms mean. When he used to transport these goods which are meant for export from his place of removal, that is, let us take generally the place of removal is factory. When he transports these goods which are meant for export, this exemption is basically for export goods, not for all goods. So when these export goods are transported with the help of a GTA by road from factory to a CFS, ICD, port or airport, the service tax was exempt. You know that GTA service is liable to service tax, though it has an abatement attached to it, but still service tax is payable. However, by virtue of this amendment, or by virtue of this exemption, the service tax liability on the road transportation of goods meant for export from factory to CFS, ICD, port or airport was exempt. Further, when the goods were transported from CFS or ICD to port airport, in that case also the service tax was exempt. Now coming to what is CFS and ICD. You must have read in your customs, we have given you a brief about the procedure. In fact, these are basically, they form part of the customs procedure relating to export and import. You will learn about them in greater detail when you come to final level. But right now, to understand to a limited extent, to be able to appreciate and understand this amendment in a better manner, I'll just tell you, I'll give you a brief what is CFS and ICD. ICD, as the name is Inland Container Depot. CFS is Container Freight Station. ICD, as the name suggests, Inland Container Depot. ICD is situated in the hinterland. It is not situated near seaport or near the seaports. It is situated in the hinterland. CFS is Container Freight Stations. Now, if you see the modern trend in the transportation of goods is that they are transported in big containers. These containers are huge. They are in the size of a big truck. So previously when the goods were transported, they used to be transported in smaller cases which were of different shapes, different sizes. That make the transportation of goods in ships difficult. A lot of wastage of space was there. Then this modern trend has been adopted of transporting the goods in big containers. it is easier to transport the goods in such containers. They are transported by way of, they are loaded and unloaded by way of means of cranes. That is why this term container comes into picture, inland container depot or container freight stations. Containers meant for transporting the goods, either exporting or the importing. Now you know that when you have to export the goods, you have to go to the customs port or customs airport to fulfill the customs formalities. Now, it is not necessary that every exporter will have his factory situated near the port or near the airport. They may be having their factories inside the landmass, but they would also prefer that they are able to fulfill the customs formalities near their factory. So in order to facilitate them, inland container depots have been established. They are situated in the hinterland. They are not situated near the ports or airport. They are near the ports. They are situated inside the land. And then the exporter, in fact, he can then transport his goods to ICDs, and there the customs clearances can be given. He can fulfill the customs formalities at the ICD. He can file a shipping bill and he can get a customs clearance from the ICD. And after that, from the ICD, goods can be transported to the service port or the airport, from where they can be taken out from our country to the place of destination where they are meant to be exported. So ICD basically, if you see, is a dry port. It is a customs port, but not at the seaport. It can be called as a dry port. CFS is an extension of the port. CFSs are established, container freight stations are established to decongest the ports. Otherwise, if everybody starts bringing their containers to the port will become congested. It will not be possible for the port people to manage their affairs. So container freight stations are established where the exporters can bring their containers. The cargo can be stuffed in those containers. It can be aggregated or segregated, and from there it can be then, depending upon the availability, it can be exported from the seaports. So that was the concept of CFS and ICD. And what is the service tax exemption? Service tax exemption says when the export goods are transported by road, via GTA, from the factory to either to CFS or ICD or port or airport, service tax liability is nil. Also, when they are transported from CFS or ICD to port airport, in that case also the service tax liability is nil. However, if you notice one thing here, that we know that goods can be exported by means of they can be exported by water, that is by a vessel. They can also be exported by way of air, that is through airplane. Then they can also be exported by means of land route. But if you see here, the land customs stations is conspicuous by its absence. It's not given here. So all this while, if the goods were exported by land route and if they were transported to land customs station, service tax was, land customs station is the place from where the customs clearance is given when the goods are exported by way of land route. For port, you know, customs port, when goods are exported by way of vessel, by way of water route, then you have to go to the customs port. The exporter has to go to the customs port. If he is exporting his goods by air, then he has to go to the customs airport to get the customs clearance. So now what has been happened, since this land route, the land customs station basically was not covered in the exemption. So what has been done, the existing exemption, the scope of this exemption has been basically widened. And now, as you can see, land customs station, LCS, stands for land customs station. So now if this is a factory, if goods are transported to ICD or CFS, their transport is exempt. Now, if goods are transported to port, airport or land customs station, in that case also their transport is exempt. So either way, whether you want to bring the goods through ICD, then to service ports, the whole transport, road transport basically, road transport by GTA is exempt. Or if you want to bring your goods directly to service ports or airports, then also in that case, here also the LCD is there and customs station is this. The road transport is exempt from service tax. Now the last amendment. Then the foreign commission agent, when a foreign commission agents provide services to a service recipient located in India in respect of goods. Initially, prior to this amendment, that service was exempted by the notification. Now, as the heading says, that exemption notification has been rescinded. So when I say that exemption notification has been rescinded, the first thought which will come to your mind is that means now the service tax exemption has been withdrawn, so that would have become taxable. No, that is not the case. Every time it will not happen. Exemption notification has been rescinded. Why? Because it was redundant. It has lost its relevance. The reason being that the service had become non-taxable. What has happened which made that service non-taxable? The amendment happened in place of provision of Service Rules 2012. I will call it in short as POPS rules. POPS rules basically are, as you know, are not covered in the intermediate level. You will read about those rules in greater detail when you come up to final level. So for you at right now, I would not bother you. I would not burden you with with the amendment which has been made in the POPS rule. For you, it is sufficient to understand that an amendment has happened in place of provision of service rules, by virtue of which the service, which was the service rendered by the foreign commission agent to the Indian exporter of goods, previously was liable to service tax. It was taxable. Why? Because in that case, the service was deemed to be provided in the taxable territory. However, an amendment happened in the place of provision of service rules, by virtue of which this service was deemed to be rendered in the non-taxable territory. The place of provision got changed, and then by virtue of which, if you and you know very well that by virtue of charging section 66B, if a service is rendered in a non-taxable territory, it goes outside the scope of service tax, and then service tax cannot be levied on it. It becomes non-taxable. So an amendment has happened in place of provision of Service Rules 2012, by virtue of which the service rendered by foreign commission agent to Indian exporter of goods became non-taxable. So there was no necessity of having that exemption notification. That exemption notification was there. Why? Because prior to this amendment, the service was taxable. The place of provision of service was the taxable territory. The service was taxable. However, it was exempted by virtue of an exemption notification. So previously also there was no service tax liability, and even after the amendment also service tax liability is not there. It is just a technical amendment. Why? Because this notification is not relevant at all. The service has gone out of the scope of service tax. Basically, service tax gamut. It has gone out of the service tax net. It has become non-taxable. Previously, it was exempt. Now, if you see, it has become not taxable. It goes out of the purview of charging section 66B. So with this, we are over with our amendments. Can we go back to the queries?
One query asked by Ram Bora is, Madam, please explain in brief the advancement of yoga exemption. The advancement of yoga, what does it mean? Yoga services means a yoga camp has been organized and a yoga trainer will train the participants for yoga. Some fees will be charged for the same. So this is a service provided by yoga trainer, and in lieu of this, he is charging some service or some fees for the same. So this particular service, in case this service, yoga service, is provided by an entity which is registered under section 12AA of the Income Tax Act, then in that case, this will be exempt from service tax from now onwards. How this exemption has been done? This exemption has been incorporated by amending the definition of the charitable activities. Actually, there is an entry in the mega exemption notification which says that any service provided by an entity registered under section 12AA of the Income Tax Act 1961 by way of charitable activities is exempt from service tax. Now, this charitable activities has been separately defined. In this charitable activities, one clause has been amended, and this clause, which earlier used to say that advancement of spirituality and religion is a charitable activity, now yoga has also been added to it. So any advancement of yoga, any activity which you can say that it is an advancement of yoga, that means yoga camps organized by charitable trust, they will now be exempt from service tax.
Guhan is asking service tax rate is 14% or 14 plus 1 plus 2. I think you are confused with education cesses. From 1st of June 2015, the education cesses, both education cess and secondary and higher education cess leviable on service tax have been, they are not no more leviable on service tax. So the rate of service tax is 14%. As I told you earlier also, for November 2016 students, the rate of service tax would be 14.5 inclusive of Swachh Bharat cess.
This brings us to the end of this session. So in case you still have any doubt, you may write us at smita@icai.in and shefali.jain@icai.in. Hope you understood the concepts which we discussed today, and thanks for the patient listening.
All the best for your examination. Prepare well and do well in your examinations.